I am a poor wayfaring stranger, while traveling through this world of woe. Yet there's no sickness, toil, or danger in that bright world to which I go. I know dark clouds will gather round me. I know my way is rough and steep, but golden fields lie out before me, where God's redeemed shall ever sleep.
Hello and welcome to Tea Time Theology. My name is Taylor Wilkie. Today we are talking about Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Season 1, Episode 10, with co-host Ivy Swinsky.
Hello.
Drake Douglas. Nailed it. And the Right Reverend Nicholas Knisely, Bishop of the Diocese of Rhode Island and sponsor of this podcast.
Yes.
This season, we've been talking about taking a look at Star Trek: Strange New Worlds through a theological and a Christian standpoint. The overall arcing theme of this season, with a few episodes here or there that kind of didn't have anything to do with it, is that Christopher Pike knows that he will eventually die to save the lives of some Starfleet cadets. We've kind of painted him as a kind of like a Christ figure in that way. And this episode is the culmination of that journey, from not being sure if he could be that person who he saw in the future, to at the end, I think at the end of this episode, he does accept that. He accepts that role. He accepts that future. And we're here to generally talk about it. Are you raising your hand or just...
No, I'm just...
Oh, sorry. So really this episode is, I think, about transformation. Going from someone who's unsure to being someone who is sure.
I wonder if ideas about fate might be a...
Well, Taylor, you have an interesting sentence here that with two people who have like masters in this, that would be interesting to see what their answers were, which is one of your notes is, let's say hypothetically Jesus didn't accept his fate and chose not to be the Son of God and did not die for our sins. How would the world be? But like, can he do that? Because isn't he like also God at the same time? Because like the Trinity, and what does that mean?
Well, I mean, not that I know, but like he's human, he's a man.
But he's also God.
I have
Right?
thoughts.
Yeah, I was about to say, I think the bishop wants to weigh in here. Yeah.
So if we want to talk about that,
Yeah.
I thought what the episode was about was not so much transformation, at least as I saw it, but acceptance. And you saw him struggling with the moral choice he was being forced to make. Would he be willing to die for others? Would he be willing to do his duty? And I think in a rather sort of heavy-handed way, they used the Romulan character to set that up so that we clearly saw that. What I was reminded of was a book that was written in the 50s called The Last Temptation of Christ, and was made into a movie, I think in the 80s, by Scorsese. And it's a brilliant sort of piece, and it shows this question that you're wondering about: what would happen if Jesus had not chosen to die for the salvation of the world? Can that happen? I don't know. It's an interesting question, but it's an important question because, and I was thinking about this, Jesus is described repeatedly in early writings as the new Adam. Right? He is the Adam, the human being who did not fall. And the Bible sort of drives that home in the story of the Passion by having Jesus be in the Garden of Gethsemane.
Right.
So he's in a garden. If you've ever seen the Garden of Gethsemane, you know it's surrounded by graveyards in every direction. So in a sea of death and chaos, here is this little garden of light and green, and there Jesus is praying, and he is tempted to not die for others. He asks that he could have this cup pass away from him, and eventually he reconciles himself and says he will do his duty. And it's sort of an obvious thing. So in the last temptation of Christ, there is this sort of meditation on what would that mean if Jesus had not done that. And was it a real temptation? Was he really struggling? Or was this kind of a play acting role that he was doing? And the last temptation of the story is that Jesus is on the cross and he sees the other options he would have had if he had chosen not to die. He has a relationship, a marriage with Mary Magdalene. They have children. He has a wonderful life, and he sees what could have been, and he, even on the cross, refuses to get off the cross and does that. Now, to that question of did Jesus actually have that choice? So we have always split the difference by refusing to make a decision in the church. It is a holy tradition. It drives everyone nuts, but we've done it. It's our thing. And we have said that Jesus is fully man and Jesus is fully divine. And the two natures are completely intertwined and completely unmingled. So you can't divide the two from each other. To say Jesus is fully God is as God as best we can understand God. We can't ever comprehend God outside of the narrative of Jesus, really. And to say he's fully human is critically important, because if he wasn't fully human, he could not change the nature of humanity by his willingness to do what God asked him differently than what Adam did. Interestingly enough, years ago, I had a very important Presbyterian minister take me aside and say he had been thinking about whether or not Jesus was really a space alien. And what did I think about that? And I thought about that for a moment, and I got a stricken look on my face and said, well, it would mess up the whole idea of redemption. Because if Jesus wasn't fully human, then the way we understand it, what Jesus is doing is changing the Platonic ideal of what it is to be human by his obedience. And that's a bell that's rung a lot in the New Testament, isn't it? The story about Jesus' obedience. So he's changing our very nature in doing this. And yeah, I thought too that Pike was the Jesus figure. I thought pretty heavy-handed.
Oh, it's
No, we're not.
We
being
picked this
subtle.
one for a reason. Yeah.
right.
But I think, looking at that story of the last temptation of Christ, this is not something they're coming up with out of whole cloth. And I was wondering, in fact, were they sort of reflecting on that with the time shifts and the alternative? This is what might happen. The time crystals and everything were kind of an interesting Deus de Machina machinery of God to let that happen.
Well, the crystals are the crystal. Pike used the crystal to see his initial future in the monastery when he in Star Trek Discovery, and himself visiting himself again is the same kind of crystal, I think. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's kind of like the orbs from Deep Space Nine.
So an interesting, Bishop, I'd love to get your take on this as a physicist, and you've done some thinking and writing about time in your career. What I saw, yes, I think Pike throughout the season has done his own sort of Garden of Gethsemane stuff. He's kind of been up and down and all over the place with this. And the thing, though, that I was really struck by in this episode was less about him accepting his fate and him accepting the fate of others, right? So he's at one point actually trying to figure out, can I save these people from this death? And then, of course, the answer is overwhelmingly no, because and if that doesn't happen, then this happens, and that's worse, and blah, blah, blah. But to your point just a second ago, time is what really allows all of this to sort of play out, and then playing around with time. And I think time is a really powerful idea in our theological imagination, especially when we're thinking about like the providence of God, right? And like God, how is it that, God knows all of this stuff, or, is God in control, or what happens for a reason, all of these things. But I think like the time question here is a really interesting one. So what about sort of your Christian theological musings around time can highlight any points here for us?
So let's go back to what you had said about he was trying to figure out a way to change a timeline to save other people. He wanted to do something good, and ultimately he decided that they all had to die, including him, so that there wouldn't be unending war between the Romulans and the Federation. So what he's asking is a question essentially of why does evil have to happen? And in Christianity, that's called theodicy. Right? And it's a huge question, especially in the Enlightenment, because we had this idea that God is omnipotent, God has the power to do everything, God is omniscient, God knows the future, and God is good. So if someone has all the power and knows all the possible outcomes, and God is good, why does God allow evil to happen? Why do children die? Why do wars happen? And turns out that was when I was in seminary, something I was fascinated by. And there's a lot of ways to break that question. And one of the answers is essentially evil happens in the moment so that a greater good can ensue. Which seems trite, but if you think about it, that's one of the ways of understanding what happens on the cross. Why does Jesus suffer what Jesus suffers? Why do the martyrs and the apostles suffer what they suffer? They suffer so that the faith will spread, in Jesus' case, so that there would be an efficacious salvation for everyone. Not everyone agrees that's the right answer to that. There's other answers to that. Free will. The rabbinical answer, I think, from the book of Job is, I don't know.
Which might be the most honest answer.
Yeah, and that's the one I sort of felt down with. But there's another one, and it's based on the philosophy of Whitehead, which goes to this question of time. It's called process theology. And in process theology, there is no knowable future. There's only potentialities. It's like quantum physics. It's based on the same thing. Each time you make an observation or a choice in a quantum system, we don't know how to describe it, so we talk about parallel universes, the multiverse. Each choice in a system puts you into a different universe, and all choices are valid. So at each moment in time, there's a cascading future of multiverses going forward. And people played with that.
Star Trek did. In The Next Generation is a big episode about
Also,
that.
like Doctor Strange and the multiverse.
Yeah.
Oh, we're trying to figure this out. My gut as a scientist tells me it's an incomplete understanding of what's going on, because there's so many paradoxes in it, and you end up sort of having to wave your hands and ignore a whole bunch of stuff. But let's just say that's the case. If there's an infinite number of futures possible in every moment for everything, it's essentially unknowable what's going to happen next. And so that's the process theology way out of it. God can't be omniscient. There is no way for omniscience to happen. And what you're trying to do is the best choice in the moment, the most moral choice in the moment. I think in Pike's case, he was trying to save himself and the cadets.
Right.
What he ultimately agrees to is die and let the cadet. It would be kind of morally more murky if he had decided to let the cadets die so that he could live.
Right.
Right.
But that would be against his whole character, I think.
And that would be not Christ-like.
Yeah.
So, he's trying to figure out a way to have all of that happen, and ultimately he realizes, no, they all have to die so that this greater good can ensue. All right, so just theodicy. And I thought that's always a great plot device, big fan of the Odyssey showing up in Star Trek as well.
We spent some time a couple episodes ago really talking through that because and what we loved about it is that even in outer space, right, where everything is so different, and or in a future where technology has gone so far that poverty's been solved and war doesn't happen as often and blah blah blah, and yet the Odyssey still shows up. It's just it's this truly universal idea that it is, even though it's difficult, is kind of strangely comforting. That's the experience of being alive.
If you're going to believe that reality has a teleology, a purpose, and an end to it, you're going to have to deal with this question of the immoral experience of the present moment.
Yep.
Is there redemption? Is there meaning? Is there future? And I think some people just despair, right? The Dadaists and the existentialists just say, no, this is it. It's just life stinks.
Got, yeah.
And that's what you got. So don't sweat it. And other people have come up with various solutions of it. And I think it has been part of it's been part of human civilization from the very beginning.
I think Pike, the closing scene, I think is so powerful. When he's kind of come full circle, or he's arrived at this understanding of the way things must be, and yet he does this little lap of the bridge and is in this weirdly content place.
That music cue was great.
Yeah, and that to me was so instructive and so indicative of, I think, what I think being a Christian requires a lot of us, right? It's hard work often. It requires sacrifice in a lot of ways. But I keep on trying to remind people that there are real fringe benefits to being a follower of Jesus. And one of those is this kind of, it's the peace that passes all understanding, right? There's a way that even in allowing ourselves to fall back, right, into these unknowable realities and these things that don't seem fair, they don't work out, and yet Pike just embodies sort of that kind of, okay, well, I have faith that even though I don't understand this completely, that this is the way to do it, right? This is the way to go. I think your point about Jesus sort of changing our nature, right, is a way that that's the inroad, right, to this kind of, you get to live a different way when you link up to this project.
I think you can see the divinity that is present in each moment.
Right.
I think that's what I was picking up in that scene, which I was also deeply impressed by. We live in an era when we kind of assume there's going to be food on the table at the next meal. We kind of assume that we're going to wake up in the morning. But in times of war, in times of great alarm, people don't have that ability. And you find that they are much more focused and intentional about the relationships they have. I think when you talk to people who served in the military in combat, you'll find that they have these intense relationships with the people in their squad because they don't know if they're ever going to see them again. And it kind of, the old quote, nothing focuses your attention like your impending death. And I think you're seeing some of that in that scene.
I'm also excited to see in season 2, which I will now watch because I'm in, but how Spock understanding that Pike is pretty much being willing to die to save him. Like, they have that like really beautiful conversation with each other, and I'm interested to see how that might change Spock as well, because now it's no longer like, oh, we're just saving these cadets and like that's great, because the cadets are like unknown. We like know their names, but like we don't really know anything about them, but we know Spock. We all like Spock and enjoy him as like a character watching it. So I'm just interested to see if that will change sort of decisions he makes as well. And I don't know because I haven't watched any of the other seasons of anything, but like if that comes up.
Spock is one of the most important people in that galaxy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Spock is, I mean, the joke is like Spock is Star Trek Jesus because he literally dies and then comes back.
Yeah.
But he also sets up a lasting peace with the Romulans.
Right.
Later he goes to live on Romulus amongst the Romulans to better understand them and to bring them into the Federation. Even the Kelvin timeline, the new Star Trek 2007 movie that came out in 2007, Spock goes back in time because he can't save Romulus from their star exploding. Mm-hmm. That's what changes history, and that's what sets that whole storyline in motion. Is Spock doing what he does, and also, there's the Kirk and McCoy aspect of that. Mm-hmm. Of, you like that triumvirate of those three men together on the bridge. Spock is logic, Bones is passion, and Kirk is like the amalgam of both, and he needs to listen to both sides of himself in those moments, and the three of them end up saving the galaxy more than once.
Mm-hmm. It would be a short show if they didn't.
Right.
But no, the interplay, that was another really powerful moment for me, was when Pike is, and even the dialogue there was, I thought, masterful when Spock comes in at the end and Pike is basically saying, no, this has to happen this way because actually you are in a way this other savior character. And I saw a pretty interesting in initial sort of parody there, sort of an allegory of sort of Christ in the church, right? Mm-hmm. Is to say, this thing has to happen, right? This is going to happen, right? This is going to happen. This is going to change things so that you can go and do the thing that I'm calling you to do, to bring everlasting peace, to do the other thing. So there's an interesting kind of, again, it's that multi-layered, I think, effect of kind of call of the process and the product and the project of salvation, and how everyone is kind of brought into it in their own way. Obviously Christ's doing the heavy lift here, but how it sort of seeps out into the entire reality, I think is not dissimilar from our Christian project today, And
I think it brings into question, like, how do you live your life differently knowing that someone has already sacrificed for you?
That is the question.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That is the question.
Let me rephrase the question.
Yes.
If it is God's reality that the way to save other people is to be self-sacrificial, and Jesus is demonstrating this on the cosmic level, it's not that we're doing Jesus' salvation, but sure, we are discovering that if we want to save others, we have to give ourselves up. And it's not the same cosmic thing, but it is just the nature of reality. It's not even the Christian project. Leave the Christian project aside. I think this is where you can see contact with other faith groups. This is how the universe is made, that you find power by self-sacrifice and power of a sort. And it's interesting because some people get that, and some people, even today, to say they're Christian, simply can't understand that. The scandal of the cross and what it means, both in terms of what God is doing in the world and what we are to do, is extraordinary. I think you see it in the more conservative traditions, where you'll see super hyper buff Jesus on the cross, muscular, tearing the cross apart, because they can't imagine that God would die.
Self-sacrifice and radical empathy.
Yeah.
Did you? I thought the Romulan dialogue was so interesting as it was talking about this. We must cull this ship, and now our fleet is stronger, and that the Romulan commander, who I found the most sympathetic character in the entire episode, is the one who said, I have a duty to perform. I am a man of duty. I have this one last duty.
Yeah.
I must do this.
I think the actor who portrayed that commander on that ship, he did a great job, because he's not just choosing to portray that character however he wants to. He has a legacy to uphold. This character exists in the original series. There's a whole episode about this, Balance of Terror, which is probably one of the greatest hours of television ever. I think, but I'm a huge Star Trek nerd.
I'm very old. I actually saw it in early reruns on black and white on my little TV set as a kid after school.
And it's just, it's like you said, it's duty. It's important to him, and he's signaling that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also important to his society, and it's important to our reality. And I think that's what Pike heard that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I am a man of duty. I have a duty to perform.
Mm-hmm.
And I picked up. At some point, if you want to come back to talk about time, we can come back to that. But I just want to stick that pin in the conversation.
Yeah, I think especially in present society, at least Western or modern, my experience with sort of what salvation does to my reality, which is going to be completely antithetical to my entire point here, but is that there is a holy and mysterious kind of freedom in the self-emptying, right? There is, and like that is, I think that is what so many of us struggle to see, right? Is that it seems only like a cost, and there would be no benefit, right, to living out a life that's willing to be poured out for the sake of others. I think you're exactly right, Bishop, with the that modeling of Christ on the cross. But then what you also see on the other side of course, the resurrection is an immensely free Jesus, who is free from even the power of death, and all these things. And so I think this episode did a good job. I think again that kind of links back to, I think the Romulan commander sort of shows some of this, right? He goes to his death out of duty, yes, but with a kind of sense of freedom, right? That I think is sometimes hard to look in the eyes, but is tremendously powerful to me. That is talking about kind of this theology being even less of a Christian project and just a reality of our existence. I mean, that to me is one of those things that just feels more true than true. It is an animating thing. Once you feel it, you just know. You've kind of touched something that's realer than real. So the fact that they could sort of encapsulate this on multiple levels and multiple characters, I think, was really, really well done.
It is a moral truth, universally accepted.
Yeah.
And you see it, right? You see it in the cynics. You see it somewhat in the Stoic philosophers. And in fact, it was so striking that Christianity was initially thought of as a philosophy, not a religion. It was a form of atheism. And that was one of the charges they brought against Christians in the early days. Yeah, in science, it's very similar. When you come up with a theory that lets you do multiple things in multiple contexts, you have a sense that this is a very general and very important insight into how reality works, as opposed to a very specific model that lets you make a plastic molecule a little bit longer. That is not a universal truth. That's widely received. And I think it's absolutely the case. Christian religion sometimes gets in the way of our understanding of the nature of reality as it is revealed in the person of Jesus. And that's less about religion and more about, these are deep, profound moral truths about how we are to live our lives. And are we willing to trust that is going to make things better? Are we willing to die for others, knowing that it's going to make things better? Are you willing to make your death, which is inevitable, count for something?
I did think it was interesting, the parallels between like the older captains and like the younger like lieutenants and captains, and how like Kirk and sort of the younger lieutenant on the other ship both were like so ready to fight. They were like, we're gonna go to battle, it's gonna be great. And then the two older captains for Pike and the Romulan one were both like, you actually don't want to fight. Like,
Yeah, you don't want this.
you really actually don't want this. And like trying with diplomacy. And like, I do wonder what would have happened if the lieutenant hadn't called the other Romulans to come. Like what that conversation could have been. And I just think there's something interesting in like this like wisdom of age as well. Because like in the story of Jesus, like what would have happened if he had like, what was it, like 33? Like would a 50-year-old Jesus behaved differently than like a 33-year-old Jesus, and like what would that have sort of looked like in that sort of like wisdom of age, if you want to call it that.
I mean, I'm 36, and I've definitely noticed a tempering of my I want to say hostility, but like
Passions.
Like I used to be like, well, there's only one answer, and the answer that I know is the right answer, and now I'm like,
what is truth?
guys, let's is it all just, it's all just subjective, everybody.
Yeah.
It does get complicated when you're talking about Jesus, and does he have a moral development? Does he have an arc of recognition? And I think humans certainly do. Does Jesus? I don't think that's part of the gospel story. The idea is that even as a child, Jesus was able to go to the temple and confound the elders, that this is God fully incarnate and present in ways we can't understand. And for a while, that God reality was shadowed by the mortal experience. But when the moment starts to arrive, was what we had last week, the changing of the water into wine at the wedding of Cana in Galilee. And Jesus says, my time has not yet come. There's clearly a moment when he's going to decloak, to borrow a phrase, and you'll see what he's here to do.
His mom still gets him to do it, though.
Yeah.
Which is my favorite part.
You gotta listen to your mom.
It's funny.
Well, Mary as the fully human person in that story. Jesus is not. Jesus is fully human, but Jesus is also fully divine. Mary is completely and only human, and with an incredibly unique relationship to God as the Theotokos, the God bearer, representing all of us as humanity, because we all bear God in a corporate sense. Which leads you to this profound paradox about God entering into time, the infinite entering into time, and it goes back to that question about the Klingons and the time crystals and the multiple realities and the different time loops. And I was watching all that, and I could feel myself getting uncomfortable with the science of it all, and I said, no, it's a story. It's not.
It's science fiction.
It's a story, and they need this as a device to make the story work and to set up the moral challenge that they're going to figure out a way to resolve. And that's how these time loop things happen in narratives. And we say that because ultimately, right now, our best understanding of the nature of time is that time doesn't exist. It's an illusion. It's something we experience, but it's not real. And I say that in terms of physics, not philosophically. The math works without time, and in fact, it works better. And that resolves the weirdness of time that every other dimension, we can go backwards and forwards, and time we can only go forwards in. And the best answer we have right now of the nature of time is it is a emergent property of breaking of entangled states between subatomic particles. It's related to entropy in that way, and it's entropy that gives directionality in what we experience as the flow of time. So to resolve that, you go back to something Augustine said a long time ago, which is that there is a reality of the flow of time that is surrounded by God's eternity. And God exists in the eternity and enters into the temporality, and that's the moment of the incarnation, but the eternity still surrounds it. A friend of mine, Bob Russell, who is a professor in California and a member of the same religious order that I'm a member of, was trying to work this out as he's a physicist and a relativist, a cosmologist, and the same training I had, though he's much better at it than I am. But he's also a PhD in theology and a student of philosophy, and he was very much influenced by Wittgenstein's thinking. But there is in physics this idea, as in cosmology, this idea of something called the block universe. And in a block universe, there is a regime of temporality that is surrounded by a regime of no flow of time. And that seems to fit exactly with what Augustine's doing. It also, I just point out, because of what Bob was trying to work out, also gives you a reality to the bodily resurrection, both of Jesus and of us. And I think that was Bob's motivating question. He says it in his preface. He lost his father at an early age. He wanted to know, would he ever be able to hug his father again? Not spiritually, not in a ghostly form, but physically hug his father again. And it looks like you can come up with a mathematical model and a way of understanding the universe that is both consistent with everything we understand about science, everything we understand about theology, that says, yes, there is a bodily resurrection, and that is a possibility, because you can go outside of the realm of time. Now, to the Star Trek episode, I was watching it, I was thinking, well, okay, does any of this make any sense? And if there is no flow of time, and time is an illusion, then all time is present at any one moment. And so younger Pike is also present with disfigured Pike, is also, and they're all sort of in that moment. And the idea that then the question is, what does it mean to make a change? What does it mean to make, in scientific terms, what does it mean to make an observation? What does it mean to choose one path or another path? And that's the piece we just don't know. And I don't think the episode was trying to deal with that. But,
No.
but it's an interesting question. If all those realities are true at once, which is the truest reality? And I don't then you're back in the multiverse.
These are the questions that more and more often make me really glad that I'm not God. Because it sounds like a lot. So that's awesome.
I think it's a lot, and it may not ever be comprehensible to us, and that goes back to that understanding of how do we answer the question of theodicy, of why do bad things happen, by saying the right answer is we are finite creatures who live in time. We cannot understand it. It's just like us trying to understand 4-dimensional or 5 or 11-dimensional space-time. What we think of is 3 dimensions, and we just add a bunch of numbers to it.
Yeah, we're not really wired for it, are we? Yeah.
We can make the math work.
Right.
We just can't understand it. We don't have the metaphorical structure to make that work out.
Anything else, folks?
Well, I have just some general fun questions. Ivy, this was your first Trek.
Yes.
This was Ivy's first introduction to Star Trek.
Yes.
I personally think this is a great jumping in point for anybody who wants to get into Star Trek. What did you think of Star Trek what do you think of Star Trek as you see it from the point of view of Strange New Worlds?
I actually really like Strange New Worlds. I will say, out of all of them, this episode was my least favorite. Because, as Taylor has said, like, space battles and spaceships are, like, not particularly fun to watch. Because, like, nothing really happens.
Right.
But, so, I think this episode was, like, not my favorite. I think it was a very interesting one. But no, I really liked it. And I think it was funny because, like, as I've told people like this, and one of the other clergy person who's going to be on this podcast, or is on this podcast because it's the last one, she keeps being like, oh, have you got to the part where, like, Uhura and Spock and Kirk meet? And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about, because I go to her church. And I think it's really funny starting in, like, this weird part of the timeline where you're starting before everything else has happened. Because, like, I feel like every episode I'm like, Taylor, what is this? What is this? Why are they in these colors and not this color? Like, what is going on? So I really enjoyed it. And I think it's also fun because Star Trek is so known, like, I knew the characters, but I didn't know them. Like, if I saw a picture of Spock, I could be like, yeah, that's Spock. But, like, now I feel like I actually, like, know him as a character, and I know all of these people, which is fun. It's no longer the caricatures of them. It's like, oh, they, like, actually do more than just have jokes on the Big Bang Theory.
Right, and that's and what you said is true. This episode is good if you love Star Trek because it's a callback. It's a great callback to Balance of Terror. But unless you have that knowledge and that awareness of what happens if Pike doesn't get hurt and Kirk doesn't become captain of the Enterprise, it kind of feels hollow. I personally think Star Trek is best when you're watching Star Trek is best when they're sitting in a courtroom and they're discussing the morality of Starfleet in that universe. Those are the episodes that I'm here for. Space battles are great. Go see Star Wars if you want to see a space battle. You come to Star Trek for hard moral questions.
I agree. That's the power of the show.
I think Gene Roddenberry understood, however, that without the spaghetti western stuff,
Right.
without the space battles, without the cool technology, no one was going to watch to see the moral questions. And I think you have to put that in the context. We need the cool stuff to get us in the door. And it kind of fun. I thought the spectacle of this episode was really great. It's the first one of this relaunch I have seen. And I learned Star Trek on the original series, and it was years before Next Generation came out, so that's all we had. And we read the novels, and you'd watch these cheesy graphics, and they got cheesier and cheesier.
Oh yeah.
I don't think Next Generation came out till I was in seminary, and
87, I think.
I just started seminary when it started, and I discovered we were a whole bunch of Trekkies in seminary. Because everyone was so interested in these moral questions, which I find science fiction at its best.
Absolutely.
It is about creating a kind of moral puzzle to think through. And you tweak the technology, you tweak the characters, you tweak the circumstances to set that thing up. But so does Shakespeare, and so do novels. I mean, it's just...
But I do think that's something interesting that you bring up, that I feel like a lot of clergy really like Star Trek, are really into it, and I do wonder if there's something that you have brought up, is that we can't actually understand really what's happening in the Bible. We get it basically, and I'm almost wondering if I feel like that's a story that gets told many different ways. I mean, you have the Chronicles of Narnia, which is a whole biblical thing, and wondering do you think the reason that we keep putting it into different clothes is because we're still trying to figure it out?
I think Lewis actually has Aslan say that in the Chronicles of Narnia specifically. You don't know me, Lucy, in your world, but I will be there telling you story. I will tell you the same stories in a different way.
Makes me cry every time.
But I think that really is how we as humans are learning. We learn by story, and we tell the same themes again and again in different stories, whether it's in Homeric epic myth, or it's Shakespearean tragedy, or Victorian comedy of manners, or science fiction, or war movies, or spaghetti westerns, or The Simpsons. A lot of clergy are big fans of The Simpsons because at its best, it's putting out these same kind of moral questions. And I think this idea of trying to pick through what is the best choice in this moment is something that anyone who ends up in the church, whether they're clergy or not, I find is really fascinated by.
Yeah, it's... I don't know. I just think it's just a great franchise and a great property for all those reasons. It was so brown. Star Trek has been groundbreaking forever.
Right.
There's in the Star Trek communities right now, the people who are coming to the franchise today, seeing Strange New Worlds for the first time, seeing Discovery, seeing Picard, seeing these new Star Trek stories, and Star Trek is pretty much bashing us over the head, saying we're kind of going the wrong way. These are the questions these are the situations that we find ourselves in right now. And it's holding a mirror up to us and say, this is what you look like right now. You should do better. And people are saying, well, why is Star Trek so woke? in the internet, and anybody who's ever watched Star Trek says always has been. Like, we're not breaking new ground. Even in fact, just took the mirror for this episode is Balance of Terror. A lot of the original episode is based on everyone hating Spock because he looks like a Romulan. Kirk even says to one of the crew on the bridge, who says, my grandfather died in the Romulan War, and you have a Romulan on the bridge. And Kirk says, full stop, you need to leave your bigotry in your quarters. It has no place on my bridge. And if you can't handle that, you are relieved.
And this is in the early 60s,
Right.
during the Civil Rights Movement.
This is
and
season
the March
1.
on Washington.
Season 1, episode 15.
Yeah.
No, the sad part is that I think these ideas of prejudice and not seeing people as morally, not seeing people with empathy is universal and human, and it's the same in every generation.
Yeah.
And I find that's what's so interesting about how these episodes keep being meaningful. And you can say, oh, they're woke. Okay, if empathy and moral values are woke, sign me up.
Right.
It's not actually what woke means. Woke means something else, and I'm totally woke, and I'm trying to be even more woke. But that's a different conversation.
In a war, I mean, I don't like to do this, but I guess I'm going to do this. And I might cut it out later, depending on how it goes. But recently, a clergy person said to somebody, "Hey, be nice to people," and for some reason, that was taken as a negative by the person who it was said to. Just be nice, be empathetic, understand where people are coming from. And there's just a giant pushback on that. And I just don't understand why the idea of empathy is so polarizing in our country today.
I think because people see it as weakness.
Which we see with the Romulans.
Yeah.
That
Or
they're
we
like,
see with Jesus.
Right.
yes.
No,
And so did they, right? Yeah.
I think when you see kindness and love, some people simply cannot abide to be in its presence, and that is diagnostic.
Yeah.
Did you have other questions?
So if no one else has anything else, I think this is a great place to end our season.
Great.
Yeah. So we're gonna ask this question twice today. Bishop Knisely, if someone wanted to get in touch with you, how would, or meet with you wherever you are, where or how should one do that?
So the most consistent place to find me online has been for decades now on my domain, entangledstates.org. And entangledstates.org appears as a Mastodon instance. It feeds stuff onto, well, it used to feed onto Twitter, but doesn't let me do that anymore. But it feeds into Facebook, it feeds into Instagram, it feeds into LinkedIn, it feeds into Blue Sky. Now, if you want to sort of see the things that I write, or look back in a very large set of archives, that's the place to do it. And there's a contact me button there if you're interested in following up on anything.
All right. And Drake, if someone wanted to meet you on a Sunday or get in touch with you, how would one do that?
They should come to church, for sure. I am the vicar at St. Augustine's Church in Kingston, Rhode Island, and also serve as the Episcopal chaplain to the University of Rhode Island. We worship Sunday mornings at 9:30. We also have a college gathering most Wednesday evenings. All of our social and website stuff is a bit in flux, so give us a Google. That's probably the best. That's probably the best way in this particular moment to do that. But I'm always happy to have, especially conversations like this, with people at any given time, and would love to see folks if they want to take a trip down South County.
Yeah. And I know we don't say it very often, but if anybody ever wants to reach out to Ivy or me, the best way to do that is to email us at tsidetheology@gmail.com.
Don't give them that. I have not checked that email in like 4 years.
Oh my God.
Don't do that.
Okay.
Message us on Facebook and Instagram. That's actually the best way.
I don't run the socials, guys.
Yes.
So yeah, and that's it. Well, thanks everyone for listening. live long and prosper, I guess.
Perfect.
I'm going there to see my father. I'm going there no more to roam. I'm only going over Jordan. I'm only going over home. I'm going there to see my Savior, to sing His praise forevermore. I'm only going over Jordan. I'm only going over home.
Thank you for listening to Tea Time Theology, a ministry of St. John's Cathedral in Rhode Island. We would like to thank our producers, Ivy Swinsky and Taylor Wilkie. Special thanks to Mario Akande and David Hines for this season's music. Additionally, we would like to thank our sponsor, the Episcopal Diocese of Rhode Island, and the Right Reverend Nicholas Knisely, as well as our guests today. Follow us at Tea Time Theology on all social medias.